All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to unpack a really intense piece of analysis. It's this hypothetical deep dive looking back from January 2026 to perform what's essentially an autopsy on the collapse of the Iranian regime.
And this quote really gets to the heart of the source material we're looking at. It's not treating this like a news report. It's more like a forensic investigation, sifting through the evidence of a system that has already died.
So that begs the big question, right? How does a regime that seems so powerful, so entrenched, just fall apart? Well, the analysis we're diving into argues it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of three massive forces all hitting at the exact same time.
Now, the core argument of this entire report is that the regime was already ideologically dead long before any of this happened. What the scenario in January 2026 describes as just the physical and very, very violent end of it all. It's a literal autopsy of a system that ran out of time.
According to the source, the whole state was basically a three-legged stool, built on these three pillars. You had the nuclear program as a deterrent, you had its influence across the region, and you had just enough money to keep things running. The report shows how, one by one, each of those legs got kicked out from under it.
So the first domino to fall was an external one. The regime's entire security strategy, something they built up for decades, was just completely taken apart, leaving it totally exposed and humiliated on the world stage.
And check out how fast this happened. In just 12 days, in June of 2025, the regime's whole strategy of deterrence was proven to be a total paper tiger. Their big, scary counterattack just fizzled. And then the US came in to finish the job.
This table basically spells out the death sentence for the regime's so-called life insurance policy. Wiping out a place like Fordo, which they thought was untouchable, didn't just set the program back. No, it took away their single biggest bargaining chip with the rest of the world. Strategically, it was game over.
And it wasn't just the nukes. The regime's other layer of protection, that whole network of proxies across the Middle East, it crumbled right along with it. Assad fell in Syria, cutting off the supply lines. And pretty soon Iran found itself totally isolated. That strategic depth they always talked about, gone, evaporated.
Okay, so the regime was dealt this mortal blow on the world stage. It's on the ropes, but that's not always a guarantee of collapse, right? So what was the spark? What was it that lit the fuse of rebellion back home?
And that brings us to the second cause of death. If the war destroyed the regime's security, it was the economy that absolutely destroyed its legitimacy with its own people. And this wasn't just a recession. This was a total, complete, structural failure.
So what is this number? 1.47 million. That was the black market exchange rate. 1.5 million Iranian rials for a single US dollar. The currency was effectively worthless. It was just paper.
And this number, this shows you the brutal reality for everyday people. A 75% real inflation rate on food. The report says the cost of living had doubled in less than a year. People were being pushed to the absolute brink.
So here was the trigger. The analysis points to the new state budget as the exact moment the social contract was just torn up. For decades, the state ran on oil money, but now, with those revenues gone, it turned on its own people, trying to tax a population that was already starving.
And this chart just shows you how insane that plan was. For every $1 the state was getting from oil, it was now trying to squeeze $5.50 directly from its own citizens. We're talking shopkeepers, workers, small merchants. It was an act of pure desperation.
So let's recap. You've got a humiliated military, a bankrupt economy. The people are being squeezed for every last penny. Protests?
Yeah.
Those were inevitable. But protests happen. What made this time different? What was the tipping point that turned all that anger into a coordinated, nationwide revolution?
This is where the analysis gets really interesting, into the psychology of it all. It talks about the population entering a state of post-loyalty. The emotional break with the regime was now total. And crucially, it was irreversible. There was no going back.
And just look at how fast it all went down. It starts with strikes by merchants on December 28th. The state cracks down hard, using lethal force. And by January 8th, that's just 11 days later, millions of people were in the streets. It wasn't just a protest anymore. It was an uprising.
The analysis pinpoints one specific event as the absolute point of no return, an act so horrific that it united the entire country in pure fury and just obliterated any tiny shred of legitimacy the regime had left, and it happened at a hospital in Elam.
The details are just horrifying.
According to the report, which cites verified videos, security forces literally stormed a hospital to hunt down injured protesters. They fired tear gas and pellets inside the wards, they beat doctors and nurses, they dragged wounded people from their beds. It was a violation of every human norm, and it lit the nation on fire.
So, with the regime shattered, strategically, economically, morally, the report concludes by asking, okay, what comes next? And it lays out two potential and very, very different paths forward.
On one path, you've got what they call the Venezuela model. This is where the Revolutionary Guard just takes over completely, a pure military dictatorship that crushes everyone and rules over the rubble of a failed state. The other path is a cascading collapse, where the system itself just fractures from within, and an organized opposition is able to step into the vacuum.
But the report's final diagnosis of the situation in that moment is just bleak. It doesn't matter which path it takes. In this scenario, Iran is no longer a country in any normal sense. It's become a territory occupied by its own army, fighting a war against its own people.
And that brings us to this final, powerful quote from the report, which really just says it all. The idea is dead. The ideology is gone. What we're watching now is just the violent, bloody process of burying the body. And it leaves us with this final kind of chilling question that really applies to anywhere in the world. What happens when the belief system that holds a country together is dead and gone, but the violent machine that enforces it is still standing?